Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. A few years back, when I was around 18, I entered a very rebellious phase in my life. I have always been a prodigy child. I always did what I was told. I never stayed out late. I didn't smoke, didn't drink, scored the highest in all my classes, and all my family, my friends, and my friends' families thought that I was the perfect kid. But then something changed. I was on a lot of medication due to my health, and I started going through bouts of depression. I started acting up like never before, and I stopped going to school. I would just stay in bed all day. I didn't talk to anyone. And then, I slowly started talking to strangers online. Initially, it was just talking to them online. I would talk to a few people till I found someone interesting. I would then dedicate all my time talking to them till they no longer held my interest. And then, I would move on to the next person. This went on for about a year. Then I eventually started meeting these people in person. And most of these meetings were sexual, and I was very reckless. I slept around with more people than I would like to admit. And regardless of my lack of concern for my own safety, I somehow never met anyone that had any evil intentions. We would meet a couple of times, do the dirty, and that was that. Until I met this one guy though. I was talking to a couple of guys at that time. I wasn't in any sort of relationship, but I was just being a hoe, you know. This guy starts talking to me and asks me about my hobbies, my interest, what I do, and I told him that I don't smoke or drink, and he was shocked. I told him that it wasn't that I've never done it. I tried, but it just felt like it wasn't my thing. We talked for a couple of more weeks, and I ended up talking about how I've been going through depression. And at first, he just listened. Eventually, he started telling me that I should try smoking. It would help me relieve my anxiety and my stress, and I always turned it down, but he was relentless. And after a month or so of talking online, we finally decided to meet. We had never had any sort of sexual conversation or anything like that. We were just going to meet as friends. I was supposed to meet another guy, an acquaintance, for something that I needed. So I suggested to the online chat guy that we meet briefly for lunch, and then he can then drop me off to the other guy's place. He agreed, and then we decided on where and when to go. The day we were supposed to meet, we met at the local cafe. We had brunch, and then I got in his car for him to drop me off at the place that I had to go. It was a good 45-minute drive, so I decided to put on some songs, and I just decided to relax. 5 minutes into the drive, he offered me a cigarette. I declined. He insisted and kept insisting until I gave up and then agreed. I then opened the box, and there was only one cigarette in there. I told him that it was his last one and asked if he was sure that he wanted me to smoke it, since he would have enjoyed it more than me. He said yes, so I took the cigarette out. But there was something odd about it. It didn't look like it was store-bought. It rather looked like it had been rolled by hand. But then again, I had never smoked enough cigarettes to be sure. So I lit it up, and then I smoked it. I couldn't even smoke half of it. It made me extremely nauseous, so I gave up halfway through, and then I offered it to him. But instead of smoking it, he then put it out and threw it away. I thought it was weird, but I assumed that he probably didn't want to smoke while driving. 30 minutes into the ride, I started feeling very sick. My whole body was shaking and I was extremely nauseous. I could barely keep my eyes open. I kept telling him that I wasn't feeling good and that maybe we should go to the nearest ER instead of where I was going. But he kept telling me to just relax and lay back. Everything about that ride felt off. I told him to stop the car and drop me off wherever we were, but he refused, and all I could think of was pulling out my phone and then calling for the police. When he noticed what I was doing, he immediately stopped the car, and then I got off. I couldn't stand, so I sat on the roadside and I called the guy that I was supposed to visit. He then drove to where I was and picked me up, took me to his place, where I threw up all over his living room multiple times. For the next hour and a half, I just laid on the couch. My whole body was shaking and I was constantly throwing up. The guy brought me water, gave me some electrolytes, and kept insisting on going to the hospital, but I refused. I had no idea what I had smoked, but I was sure that it wasn't just plain old cigarettes. I was scared if it had been some illegal drug, and if the hospital caught on, then I would get into trouble. And I absolutely did not want my parents to find out what I have been up to. So I just laid there. I kept throwing up, letting whatever that shit was to get out of my system. All these years later, I am now married to the guy who picked me up from the roadside and helped me through an insanely embarrassing time. Oh, and to the guy that laced my cigarette, let's not meet. I'm a 35-year-old female, and I used to work at a small startup that had a small warehouse in the city. I enjoyed it because it had great benefits, perks, and a pretty easy commute. I just walked a few blocks to the metro line in our city. Usually, I worked the day shift, so my walk to the station wasn't too bad. I just encountered the normal city life. And on the occasional time that I worked into the night, I usually walked with some co-workers that I knew, or my then boyfriend would pick me up. If I had to make the walk by myself, then I would wear giant headphones so I can deter catcalls and other annoyances. Well, I had a doctor's appointment that morning, but I was allowed to make up my shift by staying after the day shift crew left. However, I finished my shift before the rest of the evening crew, which meant that I had to make the walk by myself that day. It was already dark and the street was pretty much deserted. Well, except for this one really tall burly dude that's walking just ahead of me and yelling into his phone. I had my headphones on, but nothing playing because I wanted to be aware of my surroundings. Big burly guy sounded angry, and he didn't turn back to look at me until after he yelled into the phone, "Well, I did my part, and now it's up to you to get rid of the body. I don't care what you do, just make it disappear." Then he turned around and stopped walking and then looking at me surprised. I quickly stopped to not run into him, and I give an awkward grimace or a smile, acting like I hadn't just heard him say that because I was listening to music. And at the next crosswalk, I quickly crossed the street, and he just stared standing in place until I was a block away, and then turned the corner and disappeared. I don't know if this guy actually knew that I was behind him and just said that to scare me because he thought that I was listening into his conversation, I hope. Or He was up to no good. But that was super creepy. I never walked to the metro when it was dark after that by myself. Either I had a ride or a buddy to walk with. I'm a male, and I was 12 when this happened. My older brother was 14, and my younger brother was 6. And this all happened in the year 2000. I still remember the exact name of the hotel, and I was just looking at some pictures on the TOI website. It's very nostalgic, but I'll refrain from sharing the name as I'm unsure if it's appropriate to. We arrived at the hotel complex in Zakynthos, and we were given the keys to our apartments where we would be staying for the next 2 weeks. We had 2 separate apartments, one for my older brother and I, and a different apartment for my parents and my youngest sibling. The apartments were like mini blocks of 4. There were 2 up and 2 down. My parents and my youngest sibling were in a separate apartment in the same block on the first floor, one across from us, and my brother and I were on the ground floor. One important detail is the block we were in was at the very end of the complex. The 4-foot perimeter wall separated my and my brother's apartment from the outside of the complex, which I remember just being a load of plants and bushes. Near the beginning of the holiday, for whatever reason, there was a conversation amongst us about how Albanians would sometimes rob or mug the tourist, but that we would not have any problems because Zakynthos was not part of mainland Greece. No idea of how factually correct or stereotypical that was, but the conversation happened. During the holiday, as you do, we made friends with some of the other kids. One of them demonstrated how easy it was to unlock any of the apartment doors just by sliding a bank card between the door and the frame. Impressive and funny at the same time, but not so much in hindsight. About 1 week into the holiday, we thought that it would be fun to have our youngest brother stop in our apartment for the night. In the middle of the night, we were awoken by some loud banging on our door. It was our dad checking on us. 2 Albanian thieves had made their way over the perimeter wall and had attempted to break into the apartments. They'd successfully broken into one where a couple was sleeping, and they began looting the place. The lady woke up, and after realizing that the man prowling around the apartment was not her partner, she let out a scream which caused them to flee. One of them successfully jumped off the balcony on the first floor and made their way off, while the other had face planted upon impact and was lying in a pool of his own blood. Police had arrived and were apparently giving the guy a good kicking. It was all very dramatic, but after checking the apartment over and ensuring all the doors were locked, our dad returned to his apartment and we just went back to sleep. The particularly creepy part is that the next morning, we stepped outside to shoot at the hornets with the arsenal of BB guns that we had purchased, but we noticed 2 very obvious handprints on the sliding doors to our apartment. It was shaped out by that sort of red-brown soil or sand. They'd clearly tried breaking into our apartment, and they'd have been stupid not to, given that we were the very first apartment on the side of the perimeter wall. Who knows if robbing a few disposable cameras would have sufficed for them if they managed to get into the apartment with just a 6, 12, and 14-year-old bunch of kids. One bonus little creepy encounter a bit later on during the holiday is that I had returned to our apartment after swimming and I had gone to use the bathroom. Upon exiting, there was a completely random middle-aged guy that just stood there in the kitchen who said, "Morning." I said the same back, and I just ran off back towards the pool at the other end of the complex. Turns out, it was the owner of the complex who decided to just let himself into our apartment to do some maintenance or something. I mean, who the hell does that? I never really found out what happened to the burglars after that. But safe to say though, that face planting from a first floor balcony jump probably smashed a few teeth. Hi, I just found out about this subreddit and I have the perfect story for it. But before I tell the story, it's important to know that my dad is not by any means a fighter. He is not an angry man, and if anything, he's a bit meek. So this happened when I was 6 years old. My dad and I went to the supermarket, and it's one of those grocery stores where there was a hot food section where you could just sit and eat, and kids under 10 ate for free. My dad and I were getting food at the buffet, and then we were going to pay at the cash register and then go sit down. Now, this whole section of the supermarket was very small. That is, the tables for eating were very, very close to where you selected your meal. And because my meal was free, I remember asking my dad if I could just go and sit down. He said yes, and that he would be right over. Again, he was probably going to be at most 20 feet away from me. When I sat down, I remember a grown man, I think about my dad's age at that time, coming to sit directly across from me at the table. The table only sat 2 people, he said. "Do you mind if I eat with you?" And I just remember feeling so scared that I froze and I just went quiet. I didn't answer, even though my 6-year-old impulse was to be polite. It was like my mouth wouldn't open. But the next thing that I knew, before I even had the time to feel rude for not being able to reply, my dad was right in this guy's face, grabbing him by the shirt collar. I don't remember exactly what he said to the man, but it was the first time, and one of the only times, that I've ever seen my dad raging mad. And it was the first time that I heard him use a swear word. I couldn't believe that my dad was actually grabbing someone physically. The next thing I know, security came over and my dad had called my mom, who was in the grocery store shopping, and then there was a big commotion. All I remember is we then left the store. I actually haven't asked my dad about this in such a long time, probably since I was a teenager. And I sort of want to now, and just ask what ended up happening. This story is something that I think about from time to time, and it creeps me out. So I'm writing this to get it off my chest. So anyways, let's begin. almost 3 years ago, I was 17 years old, and at this point, I was accustomed to being in horrible situations, as all I had was my mother, and she could not hold down a job for long because she had her own issues to tackle. And so, as I grew up, we stayed in and out of roommates' houses. We never really had our own place to stay, except twice, but that didn't last long either, and we would be forced again into a new environment with a snap of a finger. So when I was 17, we were led into a situation where we were going to be homeless again, and I was used to it at this point, as I had slept in the street more than I would like. the day comes when we have to leave our roommate's house and my mom is able to stay at her boyfriend's trailer. I had nowhere to go as I had no friends at this point. I had halted my friendships because they were bad for my health, my mental state, and was overall toxic. My mom offered me to go with her, but I didn't want to as I felt like getting between my mom and her boyfriend. And he was kind of weird. Plus, I'm used to the street and I didn't think it was as bad as it was at that time. So here we are. I get dropped off at McDonald's and I eat some burgers before I go off into the streets once more. Eventually, the sun fled and the darkness was all that remained, and so I looked for a place to sleep for the night. I went into many places that night trying to sleep, but none of them were working because it was either too hot or the lights were too bright or the mosquitoes were biting me. That's when I remember a house that I used to go into to chill in. This house was under construction and it was nearly finished, so the doors were all shut and the windows were all settled, so there were no mosquitoes. I go through the back like I always did, and then I make my way upstairs. Eventually, I settle in the bathroom because there is less debris on the floor. So I lay there and I try to sleep, but I hear some sounds downstairs. I don't really think anything of it. I figured that it was the door that I came through just swinging open and close or something. Eventually, after laying there for maybe an hour, I open up my phone and I look at old photos of my life, thinking about how messed up it was that I got to this point and how I lost everything. The noises were still happening this entire time, but I just paid no mind to it. Eventually, for whatever reason, I get up and I go to sit down on the back porch because I just couldn't sleep. I make my way down the stairs and out the back door to the porch. I'm messing around on my phone for maybe 5 minutes when it happens. I see movement to my left from the back door that I just exited from. I glance over and time itself freezes. At first I think that it's an illusion, but I was in fact wrong. I see a man shrouded in darkness peering past the wall inside just to gaze at me. The lower half of his figure was behind the wall entirely, and I could not see anything but his upper body. The rest of his body was leaning to the left, peeking behind this wall, almost like the man was trying not to let me see his full body, as it would make his presence known. The man was a pure black silhouette, and I could not make out any features at all. After noticing him, I just sat there and I stared at him for what seemed like forever, but it was probably a minute or two. I expected him to come outside and talk to me because I normally talk to a lot of homeless people, and I thought the man was just homeless. He didn't come outside though, and he had not moved at all actually. He was as still as a statue and quiet as a mouse. Maybe if I had not noticed him, he would have stared at me the entire time. After staring at him, I got up and I got my bicycle and I made my way out of the property. As I am walking out of the backyard, I peer into the window that is next to the door that I saw the man in. The moonlight revealed the man, and he was still there. Only now, he was watching me walk out of the property. I could tell because the moonlight revealed the top of the man's head, and I saw his left eye gazing at me. He was a white male who was very tall and had a jacket of some kind on. I could not make out many details because he was still cloaked in darkness, but after seeing this, I just moved a little faster out of there. I got to the front of the house on the street and I looked inside to see if I could see him again, but I could not. So I just got on my bicycle and I waved goodbye to the house because I figured that the man was still watching me. Then I drove away. For the rest of the night, I could not sleep. I tried 2 different spots, but both were no luck. This is where the story ends. I know I didn't have a crazy chase or fight to the death or anything, but this was real life, and it's not the same as the movies or books. I don't know what the man was doing in there, and I assume that he was trying to sleep like I was. But the way that he was staring at me was just very unnerving. It makes me wonder how long the man was in the house, and what would have happened if I actually fell asleep in the house. Would he have stared at me while I was asleep, just completely blinded to his presence? Or did he have other intentions? I will never know, but now I don't go into houses like that anymore. So, to the man shrouded in darkness, let's not meet again. This story happened a decade ago, but honestly, it feels like it was forever ago. I remember pretty much the entire thing, but some of the details are hazy, as this was 11 years ago. It was quite traumatizing, so my apologies if I miss anything. Let me give you a bit of a backstory before we get into the actual situation. That way, you can understand how this all happened. So, to start, growing up, we never had a whole lot of money. I wouldn't say we were poor, and I never went without things that I needed, but we just never really had a ton of money or anything like that. We never had nice cars, I never got fancy clothing, and we never went on vacations or anything. That's not to say that my parents didn't try. They absolutely did. But it's just a good way to look at how it was for me growing up. And in addition to this, I never really had many friends when I was young. The neighborhood we lived in didn't have any other children until I was about 10, and my cousin on my mother's side moved in at the other corner. Well, when she moved in, we were inseparable. I was always at my aunt's house, or she was always at our house. So, like I mentioned before, our family never really left town or went anywhere fancy or anything like that. So in 2010, when my grandmother on my mother's side decided to put together a family reunion, and she told my mom that she would pay for the hotel for my parents to come out, and that she wanted them to bring me and my cousin because my aunt wasn't going to be able to make it, I was ecstatic. I was about to go to Colorado Springs with my best friend, and it was going to be the best summer ever. Even if it was just a medium-priced hotel with almost no amenities for like 3 days. Like I said, I didn't know about the Lux life, so this was an extravagance to me. So, we got to the hotel, and I was in love with it. My cousin and I had an adjoining room with my parents, so we were pretty much allowed all the privacy we wanted. But the one thing that I really wanted to do was go swimming in the hotel pool. And the first night there, I begged my mom to let us go swimming. And she was a bit hesitant at first, but after a while, she told us that we could go swimming after a little while, and that either she or my dad had to accompany us. And that was fine by me because I just wanted to get into the pool. So, we went back to the room, we put on something on TV, and then we waited. And after about an hour or so, my dad came over to the room. He said that we were allowed to go swimming and that the plans had changed a little bit. He told us that he would walk us down to the pool, stay for a few moments, and then if it seemed safe enough, he would be heading back to the room so he and my mom could spend some time together. Again, I was totally fine with this. This meant that we got the privacy and then we got to enjoy the pool. His only stipulation was that we had to be back in the room in 2 hours, or if anyone from the hotel told us to leave, we had to do so without question. We both absolutely agreed to this, and we got our swimsuits on, and then the 3 of us headed down to the pool. When we got there, it was completely empty. There were absolutely no other guests there whatsoever. We got in, and we're just doing what we did. And after about 5 minutes, my dad said that he was going to head back up. He looked up, then back down, and then told us that as soon as the clock hit 8, we were to get out of the pool and then go straight back up to the rooms. He then laid down all the basic dad rules, like don't talk to anyone that you don't know, or follow the rules of the pool, or don't leave the pool room. And again, if anyone tells us to leave or ask where our parents were, we were to get out and tell them that we were just about to leave and do so without hesitation. After he left, the 2 of us went back to swimming and we were having one hell of a time. It went like this for about an hour. No one else walked into the room the whole time, and it was such a blast. Then, at about 7:10, a guy walked in that looked a bit disheveled. By that, I mean that his hair was dirty, his face was a bit scarred and sunken, and I'm normally not one to judge. But he definitely looked like he was a bit of a creep, or maybe just aggressive. But aside from that though, he was wearing a green polo shirt, which was the same kind of shirt that the front desk attendant was wearing. And it was a bit loose on him, not really tucked in, and a bit dirty. But he appeared to be an employee all the same. My first thought was, oh great, he's going to kick us out. He walked over to the side of the pool and he waved us over to him. Obviously, I really didn't want to talk to this guy, but my dad told us to be respectful if an employee came in, so we just swam over to him. But as soon as we got close to him, he smiled and then asked us if we were enjoying ourselves. We said we were. I told him that this was the first time that I'd gone swimming in a few years, and I was just trying to be polite and make small talk in hopes that he would turn a blind eye to us swimming without our parents there. He then asked us if it was just us in the pool. We nodded, and we told him that it had been empty the entire time. He smiled and nodded along with us for a moment, and then he started asking us where we were from. And like an idiot, I told him that we were from Missouri and that we were here for a family get-together. I don't know why I told him this, and I know it was stupid, but I think I was just hoping that he would go away if I satisfied his queries. He then tells us that he's new to the area, that he hadn't met many people yet. I thought this was weird, since he literally worked at a hub where people were in and out all the time, but I figured that he meant locals. But then, out of nowhere, he literally says to us, "Well, all right, now, how about you girls take off your tops?" Obviously, we thought this was a joke, and an incredibly awkward and inappropriate one at that. I started to laugh, and my cousin nervously chuckled along with me, and I told him that we weren't going to do that. He then lifts his loose-fitting green shirt, and tucked into his belt is some kind of handgun. Then, he smiles and tells us that he wasn't joking and that he wanted us to slowly take off our tops before he did something that we would regret. My smile fell fast, like I went from awkward laughter to nearly sobbing within a second. My poor cousin, who had pretty much been quiet this whole time, basically started pleading with him to just leave us alone and that we wouldn't tell anyone about this whole thing, which was a lot smarter than what I had been saying. He laughed again, and then he said, "Look, you're not gonna tell anyone anyways, because if you do, I'll find you. Now, I want you both to start undressing, and this will be over within just a few minutes." I look at her, and she looked at me, and neither of us knew what to do at that moment. In my infinite wisdom, I thought, maybe if I stood up and did what he wanted, he would just go, and this could be all over with. So, I stood up and I started to reach back to untie my top. The look on his face was disgusting. He was clearly happy with the situation. I was almost done untying my cover when his disgustingly pleased look changed to, well, I think it was concern. He told me to stop, and so I did. Then he asked me, "Wait, how old are you girls?" And I told him that we were 15, both of us. As soon as I said that we were 15, he dropped his shirt and genuinely looked pissed off. After a moment of angry staring, he seriously looks at me and says, "Never mind. I didn't know you were just a kid." And then he starts to walk toward the exit. He grabs the handle of the door, looks back, and then says, "Hey, I'm sorry. I thought you were of age. I was never here, okay?" And then he leaves. The whole thing came to a screeching halt, much to my personal preference. Within a second, as soon as he realized that we were kids, he decided that what he was doing was indecent. And yes, before anyone asked, we ran to the front desk and then told them about the employee that had just tried to make us strip in the pool at gunpoint. We described him, we told them everything, and they then told us that there was no employee that looked like that at the hotel. I think it was then that it occurred to me. Yeah, he was wearing a green polo, but I never saw a logo, and he never said that he worked there. I just assumed. They called our parents' room and then had them come down, and then they called the police. The cops came and took our statements. Then they looked at the cameras and had us verify the person in the footage. My mom didn't let us out of her sight for pretty much the rest of the vacation, and we didn't get to swim again. Not like I wanted to. And honestly, this tainted my thoughts on the whole trip. I don't know if they ever caught the guy. We were only there for 2 days after all of this, and they never informed us of it. So, to wrap this up, dear creep of the hotel pool in Colorado Springs, I do want to say thank you for realizing that it was creepy to ask a 15-year-old girl to strip for you. But at the same time, screw you for being such a creep and trying to get girls to strip for you by brandishing a gun. I genuinely hope that you are in prison somewhere, and I hope that you and I never meet again. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.